The Chinese are now the world's largest consumers and producers of Western beer, which is really quite remarkable because until about 1900, virtually no Chinese had ever actually tasted Western beer. And what's more, the few who had were uniformly negative about their reactions to the beverage, just comparing it to bitter medicine. So how is it that the Chinese suddenly acquired this great taste for this foreign product? Economists usually point to the rise of the Chinese beer industry as taking place as part of the larger economic takeoff in the post-Maoist reforms that took place after 1978. And certainly that is when the huge growth in the beer industry took place. And yet the origins of the Chinese taste for beer and the beer industry really span the entire 20th century. The first breweries were, of course, established by imperial powers. The Qingdao Brewery, established in the German concession in 1903. The Harbin Brewery was built by the Russians in 1900, and there were other breweries in cities like Shanghai that had large Western influence. Because of this association with European imperial powers, and the Japanese too eventually came to become the dominant beer producers in the before and during World War II. But because of this foreign association, for modernist Chinese intellectuals to try beer, they really had to make it more acceptable. They had to nationalize it by finding a Chinese lineage for the product and really looking for the origins of similar fermented wheat and barley beverages that really stretched back into ancient Chinese history. And also Chinese businessmen by the 1920s started to brew beer and to try to market it to a local consumers. The first Chinese brewmaster, Xu Mei, was trained in Paris at the Pasteur Institute in the 1930s. But until the end of World War II and really till the Communist Revolution, the industry really could not take off. And it was actually under socialism that breweries were established. And some of these breweries were intended for export markets. But beer was considered to be a socialist product, one that was hopefully affordable to the proletariat. And because of that Chinese lineage that had been established before, it was considered acceptable even by Mao. And so Xu Mei set about trying to establish the beer industry, and it actually took off under the Great Leap Forward. Of course, the Great Leap Forward is now viewed with great horror because of the famines and because of the failed products like creating the idea that they could create backyard steel mills. And of course, that was industrially very inefficient. But microbreweries actually were quite efficient. And if it weren't for the famines, they would have taken off. Nevertheless, the Xu Mei and his fellow brewmasters began to brew ever more beer, and so the beer industry began, and the taste for it spread under socialism. Of course, they couldn't advertise it as using Western style capitalist advertisements, but really that marketing of beer was as an everyday luxury in a society marked by scarcity. And that scarcity, in turn, the lines that people had to wait for foods, really fueled the post-reform growth in demand for beer.